Fate of the Union. It's been a little while since we last talked, so let's take a look at some of the biggest stories in the country. First, of course, we need to talk about what has transpired in Wisconsin. Most recently, protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin have been burning, pillaging, destroying, and stealing, all in the name of social justice. Among the disturbing incidents in Wisconsin has been the violent assault of a police officer who was hit directly in the head with a brick during the melee. As I'm sure you're all aware now, the excuse being offered for this latest round of chaos is the police shooting of a man named Jacob Blake over the weekend. Now, when the video first surfaced on the internet, there wasn't a lot known about Jacob Blake himself or the incident beyond the singular video you see here. But now we know a little bit more, so let's dive into it. Multiple media outlets are reporting that police arrived at the scene in response to a domestic disturbance. They tried to arrest Blake in connection with multiple alleged crimes, including sexual assault. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported that, quote, online court records indicate Kenosha County prosecutors charged Blake on July 6 with sexual assault, trespassing, and disorderly conduct in connection with domestic abuse. An arrest warrant was issued the following day. During his altercation with police, Blake not only resisted arrest, but also could not be subdued even by taser. After that, Blake disregarded police orders despite them also having their guns pointed at him, and instead walked around the front of his car and reached inside the driver's door. At that point, the officer unleashed 7 shots. Blake is reportedly still alive, but is reported to perhaps be paralyzed for the rest of his life. Now, what we've also heard is about Blake's criminal history. Blake has a criminal history, and one that includes an incident in 2015 where he needed to be subdued by police after pulling a gun in a bar. Records also reveal that Blake was arrested in 2013 in Round Lake Beach for criminal trespass to a vehicle and arrested in 2012 in Illinois for domestic battery and endangering the life and health of a child while also driving under the influence. It's also worth noting something about the sexual assault charge. There's been a claim flying around the internet about Blake being guilty of statutory rape of a minor, but I believe that references the wrong law. Here you can see that the stat rape charge in Wisconsin, the official title to the section of law is called sexual assault of a child, is located in section 94802. The third degree sexual assault, the charge in which Blake was facing, is 940.225. In that section, we see that it says, quote, whoever has sexual intercourse with a person without the consent of that person is guilty of a Class G felony. More of the typical rape scenario that a lot of people would think of when someone is being charged with rape. It's the kind of rape charge that doesn't have any attendant circumstances necessarily, certainly to do with that of an underage victim or one that involves drugs or alcohol, or perhaps not even with kidnapping necessarily. It's much more broadly based and general. Also, I've seen this section being floated around quite a bit, section 11-37-6, which does outline third degree sexual assault as statutory rape of a minor. But you will notice here that this is actually Rhode Island's section of law. You see state.ri.us. So it looks like this is being a stand-in to justify what in Wisconsin is not statutory rape under third degree sexual assault. So that also seems to be a little bit of misinformation floating around. Although the basic difference in the charge, of course, doesn't change any facts or circumstances of the case, certainly from a police officer's perspective when arriving at the scene. And getting back to that, the shooting of Jacob Blake, we now know from the state's initial investigation that a knife was indeed found on the car floorboard at the scene of the crime. So it appears that item in Blake's hand that's seen in some of the more zoomed in versions of videos is actually a knife as originally suspected. We were also certain now that while the children in the car having to witness the shooting is a tragedy in itself, Blake did have ample opportunity to avoid this fate. He disregarded officers' warnings numerous times and proceeded to walk back to his car. He then walked around the front of the car, beginning to get out of officers' line of sight. There were also reports that he had a knife on him. Now we know that that seemingly is true, and you can see him holding an item in the video. If we are, in fact, met with a case in which officers were attempting to arrest Blake, he resisted arrest, including an attempt with a taser, and disobeyed police officers as he reached into the car, then we again see a case in which the facts simply do not add up to an unjustifiable shooting by the police. We must remember, similar to the Rayshard Brooks case, it is not whether one personally agrees with the officer thinking he's in danger, or if one would have acted in the same way. Instead, we must ask ourselves, could an officer in the situation reasonably think his life was in danger when faced with the supposed threat? When facing a suspect who appears to have a knife, resists arrest and a taser shot, and disobeys officers long enough to reach into his car, I think you have to arrive at the conclusion that the officers reasonably thought their lives were in danger. You have a suspect who clearly doesn't think anything of disregarding officers and resisting arrest, and now he is reaching into his car for who knows what. Even though 7 shots may sound excessive, and the kids being in the car witnessing and being in at least the nearby presence is dangerous in itself, an officer could nevertheless reasonably conclude Blake posed a deadly threat after repeatedly resisting officers and then reaching into the car despite officers' orders to stay still. But, as too often become the case, the further destruction of these communities will be the uncalled for response when faced with a police shooting under any circumstances, justified or not.